Welcome along, all. I'm working on the basis today, a mixed audience. So I'm probably guessing most of our colleagues on the call probably come from an occupational hygiene, health and related background, but I'm hoping we've got a few colleagues from the wind and renewable energy sector. Going to be a bit of a double act. So initially, Chris, is going to take you through sort of probably slightly more bigger picture overview of where wind energy and workplace health is, with a focus on our hygiene issue. David's going to pick up the part two, and there will be a tiny overlap, and that's intentional. But he will focus on some really interesting case studies that perhaps might even surprise people who are less familiar with the wind sector, of how they may be topical and one of the challenges we've had to deal with in recent years. So as said there, formal welcome to myself and David. So again, my name's Chris. I run an independent training consultancy business, Renewable Safety. And as I said, David will probably give a short intro to himself when he gets around to it, so I won't repeat anything on David's side. I'm going to take about 25 minutes. Lee's, if I'm still going at 25 past, Lee, please jump back in and cut me off, because I'm conscious we want to keep on time. But it is one of those topics that we can go down lots of different rabbit holes. It's very topical. So hopefully we can allow a bit of time at the end, give us at least 10 or so minutes at the end if there's any Q&A. And certainly from a personal point of view, if people have any follow-ups after today, probably through Lee, but I'm very happy to take any questions or queries after today's session. So what am I going to cover? Well, just a little bit of background on myself. I'm just going to give a big picture overview of where occupational hygiene perhaps fits into wind. So that, again, probably mainly aimed at my occupational health and hygiene colleagues today. But I'm also going to do a tiny little look at occupational hygiene principles, because there may be a few people from the wind renewable energy sector who perhaps don't necessarily get involved in occupational hygiene, and perhaps just to reinforce what those basic principles. And on my session, I'm going to leave us with a few sort of gaps and opportunities that where we can and should be probably taking things forward. I'll let Lee do the post course there. From my understanding, either the slides we see today or versions of them can and will be made available, but I'll leave that for Lee at the end just to clarify how any of the presentations can be shared. So just 2 seconds about myself. So my name's Chris. I've got probably almost split my career down into 2 chunks, really. My early career, originally after graduating, working in the steel industry, engineering and related sort of manufacturing type environments, very high hazard. And that's where, to cut a long story short, I really cut my teeth in occupational hygiene, going around a lot of sites, a lot of plants, and doing lots of measurements. A lot of dust, a lot of welding fume, a lot of noise, a lot of vibration. Really classical occupational hygiene I was undertaking. And we were lucky, certainly in the steel environment, we were part of a wide occupational hygiene capability, which we provided support across the UK. In my current role, hence the visual on the right, really for the last sort of 80 plus years has been in the wind sector. I do get involved in some emerging technologies, battery storage, but for the purpose of today, most of my sort of recent experience has been really in health and safety related work in the wind sector. And it's important to stress there, a context today, probably more of my area of interest and involvement has been on the safety, and that's a key issue I want to highlight today. Our sector is very safety focused, which is good, but we've got a little way to go in terms of catch up around the health type issues. So the sector as itself. So when we're talking about wind, but I'm also sort of going to say some of these principles are also going to relate to some of our renewable energy technologies. But today we're looking at wind. And when I'm referring to wind today, I'm thinking onshore wind projects, offshore wind projects. I'm talking about smaller projects and older projects, but I'm also talking about new and mega projects, whatever. The big picture is this is an industry that globally is growing significantly. And if we park some of the geopolitics to one side from the States, but it's a growing industry. It is very definitely global. So whereas Europe in particular, and increasingly with offshore wind in recent years, the UK, Europe has been very much the sort of the global centre of excellence. It is very much now an international, so we say, activity. And let's be brutally blunt, it's quite complicated. The supply chains, it's not the fundamental sort of things themselves. They're relatively straightforward because we've dealt with machinery, dealt with work at height. So the concepts and principles are not new, but the way in which we've brought them on all together are quite complex. If we want to look at what is happening and you want more data about what is happening within our industry and sectors, if you want to look at really where the projections are from a UK point of view, I'd strongly recommend going look at some of the data sets produced by Renewable UK. If you want more of a global to understand where the sort of growth projections are, where the sort of the headcount in terms of workers is, again, so reports issued by bodies like GWEC and the GWO are invaluable. But the big picture, it's big, it's growing, it's complex. Now, I would give a health warning. Any of those are sharp-eyed, please be very careful with doing Google AI images, because if you see anything that looks like this, then things like that. But I was going to remove it, but I just thought it was quite funny in its own right. But even within the very dodgy looking sort of AI image there, it gives you a tiny little snapshot of when we're looking at wind projects. We're looking at different things. We're talking about vessels. We're talking about big structures. We're talking about lots of projects, interfaces, lots of stuff we can't see on a sort of a very simplistic graphic like this. However, an important thing we do want to highlight, and especially in the context of occupational hygiene, is to understanding things across its full life cycle. There are different sort of headings, but when we look at any project like wind or offshore wind, we very definitely want to look at it from a project life cycle point of view. These are the typical stages. Clearly, from an health and hygiene point of view, we're very definitely focused on the exposure, in particular during operations and decommissioning. That's where often of the significant, and during the construction phase, obviously. One of the key themes that's been pushed within the wind sector in recent years is a concept known as safe by design, which is about thinking early into the project life cycle to understand risks. I would be trying to encourage us to think more about healthy by design. How do we make sure we are embedding sort of health and hygiene sort of principles and practice into our project development? And it's not just the projects themselves. Part of the complexity is there's lots of different parts to a wind farm. The most visible and obvious are the turbines, but if we go offshore, we've got all the vessels and logistics. We have the balance of plant. These are the other assets, typically in the form of things like substations. We've got the interfaces with the grid, both offshore, onshore, and the interfaces. So the supply chains are complicated, and the individual activities themselves are complicated. Now, David is going to give us a few more case study type scenarios. There's no definitive. So when we're looking at about health risks within the wind sector, if those have got a sharp-eyed, actually there is quite an interesting report published a few years ago that gives a reasonably good, I could pick a few holes in it, but it's a pretty good summary of some of the principal risks there. So you've got enough information probably from the slide and the reference to be able to download. I think it's a freely available download in the public domain. No great surprise, the occupational health and hygiene risks are not going to be drastically different than probably what many of you already could probably guess. Musculoskeletal, noise, vibration, both hand, arm and whole body, things like that. Chemicals, both in terms of things like sort of paints and things like repair chemicals in blades. Very topical one. By chance, yesterday, the Energy Institute announced their publication on severe weather and their good practice around that. And that highlighted heat and cold as a very topical, important issue and challenge for us. Not many ionizing radiation sources, but we do have a range of electromagnetic fields and things like that. You'll notice I have put in the brackets there, welfare. Now, we could argue that's not a risk in its own right, but it's more of a support measure, a control to deal with sort of wider issues. But I'm putting that in there is we have in recent years not always had the highest welfare arrangements accessible. They're very definitely going up the priority list in terms of there. But yes, so that is welfare from our normal, just you know, a nice place, a healthy place to work. But I'm putting it there because also when we are looking at managing exposures, contact, chemicals, things like that, access to suitable welfare facilities is an important factor in understanding what the risks are and how we control those risks, whatever. Again, David will actually pick on a very well-known occupational hygiene topic that's not listed here, but I'll let David explain what that is when he gets to it. And again, obviously acknowledgements of the year. The key thing is just a list there. I think the key thing is you don't really appreciate what these health and hygiene risks are unless you really physically do see it and experience it in contact. So we are dealing with, we've got our inspection team working off their ropes here. Again, we're looking at people exposed in very extreme environments. We're talking about construction and installation, where we may be talking about people entering into some of these foundations, very high noise levels. Some of the tooling that's being used can be very difficult to handle. And obviously we are talking about restricted and difficult spaces to enter and access. Both in the manufacturing, and this is often missed and is getting more attention, is yes, we quite naturally look at the visible deployment of these technologies, both during the construction and operational phases, but these particular components have been manufactured somewhere. These blades have been manufactured in a factory, and therefore we're dealing with all the sort of the compounds and chemicals and resins, and the scale of these means they are difficult to manage. We can't just put these in a sort of a small fume cupboard and hope they're going to provide us effective control. So the sheer scale of many of these technologies makes some of the engineering control solutions challenging. We've obviously got a lot of, again, my early career very heavily involved in big heavy engineering, steel, welding, again, so we have a lot of traditional what are called manufacturing techniques and technologies which we've been dealing with for decades, probably 150 plus years. So we are familiar, we should be familiar with how do we manage and control things like welding fume, how do we manage and control the use of coating materials and things like that. The key thing is probably they haven't always got quite the attention for a variety of reasons that perhaps they should. We also have some wider big picture challenges as well. So one of the big challenges is we're not always dealing with exposures that are in a nice, neat, contained and controlled factory fixed site environment. So we are dealing with individuals, small teams, depends what the nature of things like that. These individuals are working in remote environments. Fatigue, again, a topic that was picked up yesterday in relationship to heat stress, big issue. The fitness and capability of individuals, things like that, and stress, both physical stress, but obviously psychological stress there. It is a challenge in the wind sector. There are some risk perception issues, both culturally. So again, if you go to different cultures, they may have a different experience of what they think is important in terms of worker safety and health. And I don't mean this critically. Our industry, the wind industry, very definitely has put safety high up its priority list, which is understandable. It is looking at things like work at height, is looking at things like electrical mechanical safety. It is looking at sort of the obviously if you're going in vessels and things like that. So we are dealing with topics that are very obvious. And therefore, safety is very definitely given a high priority. But that does mean, for some reasons, that the health related and some of the hygiene hazards we touched on earlier are not always being given quite the attention as we might ideally want them to be. And there are also some commercial reality. Part of the challenge within our sector is particularly when we construct a wind farm, they're typically constructed by, certainly offshore, by the use of what is known as packages, and how they are commercially set up and designed doesn't normally encourage that, shall we say, sharing of information. I'm not saying it isn't being shared. And as we will know, you hygiene practitioners here will know many of the hygiene risks we're dealing with are chronic, they are long term. Our projects are typically in construction 1, 2, or 3 years. You've got a very mobile workforce, and we don't always have that continuity in terms of who is going to be looking after. So in some cases, we are finding that the health and hygiene issues are someone else's problem. Yes, we are doing health and fitness stuff, but as a basic principle, we're not necessarily being overly proactive about what previous exposures have you had. Are we taking on a previous exposure that now you're working on my project could be putting you at further risk? So that's a sort of a very, very big picture stuff around the wind sector. Again, do some of the actual, we'll give you some other references as well, and I know David will mention some of the references. There's lots of good information, obviously a little health warning around any access to sort of online videos and things like that, but there are some really good instructive videos that actually give you a good perspective of what and how some of these projects are constructed and built. Probably more aimed at any colleagues who've joined from the wind sector, is just a very basic reminder of what we mean by occupational hygiene. You'll see that I've highlighted the anticipation, and I think that's a key thing. I think it is often underplayed because we are looking forward, we're looking ahead, and we're not just looking today, tomorrow, next week, we're looking next year, but we're looking, because we are thinking about long-term and chronic exposures, 20, 30, 40 plus years potentially, what are the potential long-term risks as a result of that? Yes, there's lots of good sources that will give you more detail, and obviously BOHS is going to be one of your primary. So and you'll see some of the gaps I will identify shortly. I think certainly within the wind sector, we've got gaps in all of these areas. We're not particularly overly forward looking in terms of anticipation. We are recognizing, but I think we're fairly good at some of them. Evaluating a different thing. When we're looking at evaluating health risks, that doesn't always mean measurement, but measurement can be a very helpful tool in order to quantify potential exposures and risks. And again, really aimed at my sort of wind colleagues or whatever. So again, blatantly stolen from the BOHS Breathe Freely campaign. Again, when we are looking at impact of exposures, again, this is an all industry perspective, not unique to the wind sector, whatever. When we look at the impact, actually most of the harm and impact, and ultimately even fatalities, are going to come from health-related issues. But when we look at where the attention is, again, understandable, disproportionately, our focus is often going to be safety. Safety is very visible. Safety in terms of outcomes, if it fails, is very immediate, and not always, but usually there's a fairly clearly defined way of managing and controlling a safety risk. Health is more complex, not least because we are putting individuals into that assessment process. So you can get two people exposed to the same working environment, when working conditions. One may suffer an ill health outcome, the other may not, for a variety of complex reasons. So we do have some challenges within our sector. Again, as I said earlier, most of my early career, I spent a lot of time measuring things. Exposure data in terms of whether that's dust or fume or noise. And again, I'm being very clear. I'm not saying this is not happen. Some companies are doing this. Some are doing it very well. But as a collective across the industry, across the supply chain, probably the exposure data and the metrics that support that are, let's just say, incomplete. Health. Again, I'm pretty confident we don't have any, let's call them smoking guns in a sector. So I'm reasonably confident in 20, 30 years, if I get that far, that we're not going to be coming up with this is the new health problem. Why didn't we think about this 20, 30 years ago? So I'm reasonably confident that there aren't any sort of, say, long-term issues that are unique or problematic in our sector. But also what we don't have is we don't have consistent and reliable health data, less so even epidemiological data and information. So we certainly should be looking, are there gaps in terms of the health and exposure information? Should we be looking at some epidemiological sort of type data? Yes, there have been some unique studies and meta studies within the sector, principally in areas like musculoskeletal. But in terms of actual sort of quantifying health data, limited. And we're pretty good. We've become increasingly good in reporting safety related data in the sector. Two bodies I will mention on my concluding point, with Safety On and G Plus are the two main groups who gather. Currently, the data sets they produce are all safety released. I understand, and I'm not party to the working group, so don't quote me on this exactly, but I do understand they are looking at the possibility of incorporating some health metrics in their reporting system, but watch this space. So, don't want to be overly negative. There are gaps, but I think it's an opportunity for us. So, you know, with my personal bias, I'm being blunt, safety is probably paying most of my bills at the moment, but health is where my personal professional interest is in terms of there. And I do very much. We have a massive opportunity. We need lots of new people and existing people to come and into our sector. And we want them to join not just a safe industry, but hopefully we want them to join an industry that is healthy, is going to encourage and promote health and well-being. So we have an opportunity. If you are within the wind sector, you're an employer, I think we need, as a collective industry, take a much greater ownership of this issue. Again, it's really positive. Things like welfare are getting a little bit more attention in recent years. We are getting a bit better around sort of the fitness type issues, but some of the hygiene topics from earlier, I think we really could be more visible on. But also, many of your colleagues, perhaps from a hygiene, particularly if you are working in a consultancy or advisory role in this area, there are big opportunities to support and fill in some of the gaps I identified a little bit earlier. So it's a really big opportunity. We need more health professionals, hygiene professionals getting involved in our sector. We're lucky with people like SSE and David. Some companies are able to resource that internally, but that's not the norm. And again, it's actually a really good sort of reference report. The key thing is we shouldn't be looking at health and hygiene in isolation. It should fall within a much bigger occupational health sort of approach. And the guidance document, again, it's issued by OGP, again, gives a nice clear framing. I'm basically saying we need a lot more stuff on our left-hand side, but as many of you practitioners on the call today will know, it's not just about producing the numbers, it's what do we do with those numbers. So there's going to be all those other support roles and activity, be they clinical, health surveillance, other health and well-being support services. So they basically complement each other. I wasn't planning to get this is not the focus of today, but I do think it is interesting. For those who are UK based will notice there's a consultation going at the moment. Those who are sharp-eyed will remember we dropped a lot of reportable diseases at the last iteration of RIDDOR. Interestingly, many of those, if not all of them, have been re-brought into the reporting mechanism, and they've introduced some new ones. So again, this is some of those are very definitely health and hygiene related conditions that would need to reporting. So it is something that is getting a degree of visibility. In terms of further info, so again, I've touched on those. Again, you'll see these hopefully from David as well as we go through. Clearly, for my WIN colleagues, again, I can give you other sources as well, but BOHS is your natural first point of call. If you want to find out more about health and hygiene, go to them. If you want to know more about some of the data sets, the industry, and I think David himself actually sits on one of the health and hygiene committees within the Energy Institute. So the three bodies listed here are probably the main custodians who are leading on the topics concerned today. Again, not a sales pitch today, but again, and if you need any help and support after today on the topics, again, feel free to reach out. Now, let me stop sharing and I'll get you over to David.
Thank you, Chris. Now the fun bit is trying to share my slides. So let's get these shared. So hopefully you should be seeing those slides, yeah?
Yep. All good this side, David. All good.
Oh, perfect, perfect. Right, just opening my screen up. Okie doke. Okay, I'm sorry, I was just checking my slides are all working. So yes, I'm David Holmes. I'm the Group Industrial Hygiene Manager at SSE. I've been with renewables, just to give you a bit of history. I've been with renewables I'm working within renewables for approximately sort of 3 years with SSE, prior to which I was working in consultancy and I worked in the mining industry, primarily in Africa for a number of years, in Mauritania and Zambia in particular. And prior to that, I spent roughly 10 years in the asbestos industry. So it's quite a broad experience over the last 20 odd years. But today, obviously, I'm going to talk a little bit about sort of occupational hygiene risk in the wind sector, specifically how the industry is evolving, and where we are, where we're starting to see a sort of emerging in sort of under-recognised, not unrecognised health risks. Obviously, to set this up, to set in context, this session isn't about criticising renewables. I want to make that clear. It is about recognising that the industry, as the industry matures, our understanding of health risks need to mature alongside it. I want to focus on three things here: a little bit about emerging risks, which we are seeing at SSE, or what we begin to see, what SSE has done in response to these, and what this means, of course, to a wider industry, for the wider industry. But the key theme throughout is health risk maturity, because historically, and really reiterating what Chris has said, safety has been strong, but the health risks have sometimes a little bit lagged behind. And a video was supposed to run a little bit earlier, but that's just a video of our Griffin wind farm, sort of in the Perthshire countryside. Okay. Again, this is just repeating a little bit of what Chris said, but they are unique environments. We are dealing with obviously vertical. We're dealing with vertical workspaces, which can be sort of upwards of up to 150 meters, but so it's in a very different working environment. You do have confined in enclosed internal spaces, intermittent maintenance activities, and remote locations, and again sometimes with limited welfare, as Chris sort of mentioned, and often we have multiple duty holders throughout the life cycle of the wind turbine, and even just during asset management, you may have 2 or 3 companies which have direct involvement with each of the turbines. So really it can be complex and variable, and sometimes the health exposures are a little bit poorly characterized. Sorry. Obviously, one important point and again, reiterating really what Chris said, we are looking, the risks are not just in operational, they exist across obviously the whole life cycle. So we've got design and manufacture, we've got construction and commissioning, we've got operation and maintenance, we've got blade repair, we've got repowering, and obviously we've got decommissioning. If we only focus obviously on operations, we are missing a large part of the risk. However, in this presentation, largely speaking, I am looking at the operation element and not so much on the design and manufacture or decommissioning side. But increasingly, obviously, we're aware that hygiene needs to move upstream into design and procurement. And we are starting to see that through safety by design approaches, which again is what Chris mentioned. So asbestos, I thought this would be an interesting one. So obviously, generally, there's been a general perception that wind farms are effectively asbestos-free. In reality, obviously, that's something we can't really assume anymore. We are seeing, obviously, potential sources in legacy infrastructure, obviously, such as substation and buildings. Obviously, a lot of those are being picked up, but we're also seeing it in the supply chain, and particularly in certain recent important components. Really, so the key point, here is that the absence needs to be verified rather than assumed. This becomes not just an operational issue, but it's also a supply issue, and obviously we've got to consider asset management considerations as well. So. This is sort of the recent issue with asbestos. So this is to do with the man riding hoist systems. So a man riding hoist system, for those who are not aware, is basically a lift, and normally it's essentially a two-person cage normally. What was the issue? Well, multiple OEMs is the original equipment manufacturer, released safety concerns, really starting back in November 25 and really throughout to January 26. We identified asbestos in some of the brake components. Mainly, we talked about the centrifugal brakes, we talked about the electromagnetic brakes, and asbestos is typically contained within the seal brake units and located within the emergency braking systems. So as you can see there, just a little picture on the right-hand side, that gives you a picture of what the man riding hoist motor looks like and where the location of where the location of the brake is, and the lower picture is actually you can actually see what the brake actually looks like. To give you an idea of size, approximately probably about the size of your hand, just to give you an idea of the size. Obviously, the asbestos is contained within the brakes. It's not normally accessible under standard operational conditions, and the unit will only be broken apart, obviously, during maintenance and not day to day. What we've got to be clear of is this is not just to the UK, restricted to the UK. This is obviously the whole of the industry, so this is worldwide. SSE themselves, we do have assets in Europe and the Republic Island, which obviously due to recent changes in legislation have different legislation, and also very different legislation now. And obviously this is applied both onshore and offshore as well. So it's a very, very broad reach. So obviously, what did SSE do? So our response at SSE is obviously deliberately precautionary and it's risk-based. We acted early by putting in place operation restrictions and establishing a structural incident response. And at the same time, we focused on improving visibility, developing an asbestos asset register, and engaging directly with our suppliers to better understand the materials we use. So we obviously contacted the suppliers and to really determine which ones of these did actually contain asbestos and which ones did not. This wasn't obviously done in isolation. We work closely with industry bodies, and Chris has mentioned it. We have Safety On and G+ to ensure an alignment and shared learning. But obviously, we're in constant contact with all the other OEMs and the supply chain in general. Obviously, the key point here really is we didn't wait for obviously the perfect information. We took action based on credible risk, which is really obviously where we need to be looking with this. So what did we do? Well, we did, obviously we talked about the operational restrictions, but we obviously did air monitoring. We took over representative conditions over a number of wind farms. it was obviously within this, we didn't just look at UK, we looked at Europe as well. Some of this, the monitoring was done obviously under more sensitive methods, which some of you will be familiar with, such as TEM. What we did find is we sort of had there was no real no asbestos fibres were detected, including with the more sensitive TEM analysis, which is obviously reassuring, as it supports the view that under normal non-intrusive conditions, the risk is quite low. However, it's important to interpret that correctly. These results don't result what's happening during maintenance or when components are disturbed. So the key point is, while that routine exposure, should we say, it would appear negligible, there is still a risk if there's any sort of intrusive works or task-based activities which need to be undertaken. And clearly, this is roughly where we are now with this. We are in the process of getting these obviously changed out and working with the various OEMs and suppliers to make sure that's done according to regulation. Also, recently, there's again another emerging focus. We've had increased attention on dust and metals, and it was following a recent HSE communication. So it was approximately a year ago, a bit more than a year ago, and this was based on initial information. This was a letter which was provided for. It was actually for a HSE letter to G+, which was obviously sent through to all the businesses. And this was based on initial information from a wind farm operator where dust deposits containing metals, including lead, were identified within enclosed parts of the turbine, such as the nacelle or the generator. Obviously, at the time of the communications, the letter, it was important to stress that at the time that there was limited findings or limited information, and the overall extent across the industry wasn't clear at that time. However, it does highlight that there is a plausible exposure pathway where dust can accumulate over time and disturb during maintenance. So the focus here again is on understanding and managing that risk appropriately, rather than assuming it is either widespread or negligible. So again, SSE response is very, very similar to all our responses here. We did a precautionary approach, and we introduced initial operator restrictions, and obviously, so we reduced access within all the turbines until we had a further assessment of this. We did air and surface sampling across a range of turbines, which I'm going to chat about in the next slide, and looked over different turbines, different types, and different tasks. We obviously used all analysis was undertaken by using recognised methods, and obviously by an accredited laboratory. It happened to be IOM in this case, but obviously it moved from assumption to evidence through structured sampling. So to give you an idea of the sampling scope, so we selected sites throughout Scotland, Northern Ireland, and the Republic of Ireland. And these were sites which SSE have direct maintenance responsibility. So this isn't all of our sites. Some of our sites are shared responsibility, and some of the sort of day-to-day maintenance is actually done by OEMs or other companies. But so we looked at the sites which we have direct control over. The age of the turbines range from 11 to 24 years. Don't read too much into that. That was just the age of the turbines which we actually did the monitoring of, and which we have direct maintenance responsibility. There wasn't a reason for the fact that we didn't. We did not look at ones which were under 11 years old. It's just that's what happened to be in our fleet. The types of turbines we looked at. I'm not going to go through all those, the GEs and Siemens and Vestas, but anyone who's in the wind sector will be quite familiar with those. It was all onshore as well. We did a mix of air monitoring, a sort of a mix of personal and background samples, also took swamp samples, so including nacelle, hub surfaces, generator, secondary brakes, gearbox housing, around low speed and high speed shaft and back of the generator as well. So what did we find? We found fortunately no exceedances of the well or the OELV in Ireland, and to be honest, the vast majority were actually below the limit of detection. And similar with the total inhalable dust, that was obviously quite low. And again, it was usually less than 10% of the limit, and the vast majority of those were pretty much on the limit of detection as well. However, what we did find is in the swab samples, and this was completely at trace levels. I just want to emphasise that we did find a bit of boron, chromium, copper, nickel, lead, and zinc was actually detected, with zinc and copper being the most common. Common metals, but typically lead was third. But I want to be clear: we are talking about trace levels of just above the limit of detection of the methods. So interpretation, obviously, metal residues are present, but at low levels, and are not considered necessarily significant. But potential exposure routes are likely to be limited to ingestion, and to a lesser extent, maybe dermal contact as well. Primarily, our recommendations, therefore, is obviously we're maintaining good hygiene practices. So obviously, hand washing, no eating or drinking, which we wouldn't be doing anyway in those areas. And obviously apply proportionate controls to the task risk, particularly during high impact and intrusive works. Likely sources, well, we're not 100% sure, but general mechanical wear is probably one from the bearings and braking systems. Historical lubricant use potentially, and degradation of coatings and insulation and composite materials. So next task, which we look at, this is new. This is a well-known task, but quite a high complexity one. Is obviously blade repair. It's one of the more complex activities from an occupational hygiene perspective. Obviously, the work is typically carried out at height. Well, it nearly always is. Often using rope access or platforms on occasion, but often it's still rope. And working environment can vary between semi-enclosed or fully exposed, depending on what the task is and largely how big the damage is. Activities can be long in duration and fairly repetitive, with limited access to ventilation sometimes. Overall, this isn't obviously a standard workspace, so it's a combination of location, access, and duration can all influence how exposure arises and how they need to be managed. So obviously the blade repair, sorry, I just jumped ahead. Obviously in there, so you do, as part of the exposure profile, you do a sort of fiberglass, carbon fiber dust, epoxy resins, curing agents, styrene vapors and solvents, and sometimes microplastics. So as you can see, it's quite a complex environment to work with, especially when you might be hanging from the blades when you do this. So practical challenges, working in height, and obviously external surfaces, which I've covered. Environmental factors such as wind and weather can affect control effectiveness, and access and space constraints within working areas. Obviously, exposure complexity, it's mixed dust and vapor exposures, changing in conditions depending on the task. So this, whether it's prep, whether it's repair, whether it's finishing, and obviously duration and proximity of the source actually can vary. Obviously, the control approach, it's a combination of controls often required rather than a single solution. Reliance on well-selected and properly used RPE is very common. And task planning and sequencing to minimize exposure as well. And in the picture on the right-hand side, it's just a good example of a platform which occasionally is used, but often is still using hanging from ropes to do this work. Another one is MSDs. So obviously a physical demand of the role. Obviously, it's vertical access, so we talk about ladder climbing. Now, of course, we've previously mentioned the man riding hoist, so we do have lifts in a lot of the wind turbines, but not all wind turbines have lifts. So you do have some occasions where you've got you do have climbing assist, which are sort of which grips to your harness and sort of almost pulls you up as you're climbing. But even so, there are still going to be short elements of climbing at least. Now, whether that is from say, for example, offshore from a crew transfer vessel, which is a small boat, which is used to sort of travel between all of the sort of wind turbines, where you literally climb off. And actually, in the next in the next slide, you've got a sort of a better picture of that. You will be climbing from the crew transfer vehicle onto the sort of main platform, and often, obviously, you are climbing also from the tower, top of the tower, into the actual nacelle, because often what happens, obviously the tower is separate, so the lift doesn't go all the way up to the nacelle. It usually stops at the top of the tower, so you're always going to have that last bit to climb in. You've obviously got confined spaces and awkward working positions. So if we look at these pictures, if we look at the right-hand picture, so this is a small wind turbine, but just to give you an idea, it is, I can't stand up in there personally myself. I couldn't stand up straight in this one. Now, wind turbines vary in size. So, for example, some of the offshore ones I can quite comfortably stand upright without an issue. What you've got in the middle there is you've got a sort of a gear. That's the sort of the gears, gear shaft, and then you've also, what you can see is the circle at the top through the hatch. That is the hub, and that is to access behind the blades. And occasionally people will need to access that, so they've literally got to climb into that. So you can see it's quite a small working surface. Now, the hub, again, offshore is usually obviously much larger, and you don't have the same challenge where you can actually walk in into the hub. You can sort of stand up, but obviously, certainly in this onshore, you can see they're actually quite small. And the other picture on the left hand side just gives you again an idea of the sort of working space which you have. Fortunately, the day was a nice warm day, and they actually had the top open when that picture was taken. But as you can tell, you can imagine getting to all of those areas is quite difficult if you're needing to do any maintenance, and in particular if that is actually closed. So manual handling is an issue, and obviously we are using sort of high force tools, should we say? So they're sort of high torquing tools for for, say, for example, I've got the word now, but not repairing bolts, but tightening bolts and things like that, which is obviously something which is done much more on a regular basis. So some of the tasks can be repetitive and physical demanding tasks. It obviously depends on the duration of the activities and the variable opportunities for recovery. So on the next slide, I've really gone over a lot of what I've already discussed in the previous slide, but that's just a couple of pictures there which give you a very good example of, say, where you're climbing from a crew transfer vehicle onto the platform. And as you can see, you obviously, for safety, you obviously have to have your harness on, and you've got all your gear on for working height as well, which can be quite heavy as well. So you're carrying that with you. Other considerations, I say, I can see the time, so I don't want to go too much into these, but we do have noise on the site now. It can be present in nacelle, but in reality, the wind turbine is normally turned off if we need to go into the nacelle, so there should be no reason why we were going in there. But there are occasions where, for example, the wind turbine might be running, but we're working on the platform below, and that you've got a transformer which can be very, very noisy. But we are looking at this as one of our sort of projects to look at noise in detail throughout our offshore wind part of our business. We've obviously talked about welding, fumes, and hot works. Again, they do happen on day to day, but they obviously are not all the time. They're sort of now and again as needed, and again, same with diesel exhaust as well, associated with vehicles backup system, etc. And so, really, the key messages to come out of this it's obviously to close this. Sort of our understanding of health risk in the wind sector is obviously continuing to evolve. Exposures are often task specific and variable rather than consistent across all activities. So I've highlighted such areas such as asbestos, dust metals, where understanding is still developing alongside tasks like blade repair, which present more complex exposure scenarios. Obviously, alongside these, we've got musculoskeletal, which and other important consideration reflecting the sort of physical demands of the work in the sector. So obviously the key focus going forward is maintaining a proportionate, obviously evidence-led approach, and continue to build on understanding, ensuring that health considerations are reflected in how we work and how work is designed and delivered. And just as a final video there. So this is our Seagreen wind farm just off the coast of Montrose, and this is when the video there is when it was first turned on, if you like, online. I always like those videos. So, and obviously under there is we've got Safety on G plus the NG Institute, which obviously Chris had previously mentioned as well. Okay, I think that's it. Yeah. Okay.
Excellent, thank you. Thank you very much. That was 2 perfectly timed 25-minute presentations there. So couldn't have timed it better if you tried. So fantastic. While you were talking there, we did get a question through, so we can kick off. And obviously, we welcome any of the questions in the chat, or if anybody wants to raise their hand via the little raise button at the top, they can come off mute and speak to the presenters out loud. So I had a question from Lee here that says, which country supplied the components that contained asbestos? In the merchant shipping industry, we have found that paper-based assurance for asbestos is not sufficient. Asbestos still appears despite a technical data sheet. Sampling during construction is the only way to verify asbestos-free from higher risk country suppliers. So I know there's quite a lot of word in there, so you can have a read of it yourself as well if you click on the chat button at the top. But have you got a response at all?
I think the response, and I'm going to have to be a bit political here, our response really at the moment is this is something we are investigating. We are not pointing fingers at this stage.
I probably agree with that as well, Lee, but I think I don't think that this is sort of a unique wind type issue. Supply chains are complicated. If you buy, in our case, we have large complex structures. They're typically, if we look at the turbine, but again, we would talk about the lifts there. They will have their own supply chain. So it may be manufactured by company A, but company A will also incorporate multiple components, subcomponents, which will have their own supply chains and things like that. Now, certainly, when you look at the contractual documentation, without trying to quote a contract back on a call like this, there will be very clearly defined expectations embedded into contracts that certain health and safety requirements have been met, that products are suitable and safe. Obviously, if you look at it in a European context, then obviously we are subject to the relevant standards there. So, I think it's just reinforcing, which is not unique to wind. Supply chains and particular components and subcomponents are complicated. And at a certain level, there's only so far you can go down the supply chain in terms of verifying. And to be fair, I think the asbestos probably was one that slightly caught us on the hop, because it shouldn't have been something we were expecting to find, because certainly those who are UK based, certainly a minimum 25 years, maybe even longer than that, we should not have any asbestos inside our assets and products. So this was a surprise.
I just wanted to add, I think, as you say, it's not unique to your industry. It's been an issue in other industries as well. The traditional approach was for the contract to be asbestos free, for the SDOCs, so suppliers' declaration of conformities, to state asbestos free, but all of that's paper based. And what we've found is actually you have to go beyond paper based, and you have to actually sample during construction and to actually verify that what you're getting is what the paper says.
Yeah, and I mean, what we're doing is we are trying to go back and back and back as far as we reasonably can to sort of find out where this started, if you see what I mean. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Good presentation.
Good. Lee, I think it was another. I think it was one on the chat there. I think I saw.
Yeah, there's another question that's coming here.
I don't mind picking it up.
I'll read it out for.
Go on, please do read it out.
Oh no, it's just anybody who's not seen it yet. It's have you had any experience with mold growth or contamination within wind turbine?
So the answer is yes. It can and is the issue. I mean, it depends on the environmental conditions. But if you look on the inside of towers, they get cold, they get damp, you get moisture build up, whatever. David may comment more specifically about if they have any particular clean down campaigns. Certainly when I came into the sector, quite emotive, in I don't recommend googling. I think it's called toxic. I know parts of the states were getting very excited to think about called toxic mold, but that was more to do with residential properties and things like that. So my personal view is I don't think in terms of exposure it's a significant risk, but certainly there can be conditions where mold can grow inside our on the walls, whatever, and build up. But most companies will operate cleaning campaigns, and as necessary, some may incorporate humidifiers or dehumidifier type situations. But I'll let David perhaps anything additional on that.
Yeah, it's quite similar. I mean, obviously a lot of our new wind farms, should we say, will be now built with humidifiers. So you won't find many of the certainly newer wind farms without wind turbines, rather, without humidifiers, and that is obviously to reduce the mold issue. But yes, in our older wind turbines, we do still get it. We obviously do have a regular cleaning regime in place to obviously clean that, and we have done some monitoring on that as well. And again, we didn't find any of the, as Chris said, the toxic black mold or anything of that nature. It was relatively benign, but apologies that I haven't got the report in front of me to go through it, and the reports I've got to go through it. But yes, it is something mold does occur. It's something we have been looked at, but we are managing the risk.
And I think just link the part to that. It's a good example of a safety control and a health control. So the humidifiers are going to be very helpful on obviously reducing moisture, because we've got electromechanical system where moisture isn't always a good idea to have too much of that, but obviously we then get the benefit from the other controls around mold growth and things like that. So a lot of the good practice solutions will have a safety and health benefit with them.
Excellent, thank you. I think there's just another one that's come in. So it's a bit of a lengthier question there, so I don't know if you want to have a look at it as I read it out for anybody. Myself and colleagues in attendance for the past 18 months have been undertaking targeted regulatory health risk management system inspections, testing management systems in the sector following some initial NMV concerns raised. Out of interest, are both aware of these inspections, and has any of the learning/outcomes been shared among the industry/bodies via the OEMs, as this type of inspection has been new to industry and we have found a number of issues/non-compliances to date? So thank you for the question, Stephen. I'll pass it over to you.
So probably in my previous role, I probably would have known. I mean, maybe David may know. Certainly what I can say more generally, the two bodies we mentioned earlier, G+ and Safety On, they have regular, if not monthly, maybe even more. So our industry bodies are regularly in consultation and communication with the HSE in the UK. And so therefore, issues and topic of this would be very much a subject matter. On a personal basis, I'm not officially aware of these happening, although I have become aware that these type of inspections and things like that. But don't know whether David's got anything to add to that.
I've got nothing to add. I've got to be honest. I'm not aware of these inspections at all.
It's in part to that is sometimes that's not necessary, again, unique, because when you're looking at a project level, it sometimes may not be immediately obvious who the responsible party is. So it may be if an engagement is with a subcontractor on a particular issue, it should be shared with the other contracting parties, but sometimes it may be a visit has been carried out by a regulator, and that may or may not have been shared with other of the project partners in that particular capacity. But certainly I can say out of the official groups, Safety On and G+, there's more than adequate consultation with those bodies that should the HSE wish to engage on such a matter, they've got a sort of a direct route to do so.
Well, I've noticed we've just got a minute to go, so in lieu of any other questions coming in, I'll just touch on a point I think you mentioned at the start, Chris, that this has been recorded. It'll go up on the BOHS YouTube channel in hopefully the next few hours, if not first thing tomorrow morning. We can send an email out, and then if you're both happy to have the slides shared as well, I can PDF those and we can get those sent out, along with any other resources that you might think are useful for people who have attended today. I'm not seeing any others come in, so if you're happy, I'm happy to say we'll bring the webinar to a close, and thank you both for your time.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank
you all.
you.
Thank you all for joining. Thank you very much.